In today's video, we look into the gangland world of Colin Gunn. This has been a highly requested video, and we look how the Gunn brothers' empire was built on violent crime, extortion and dealing. They played a major role in making Nottingham known as Britain's gun crime capital. But things would take another turn when Colin Gunn's nephew dies, and he swears revenge on the man he blames for his death. We look into the case, the police investigation, and the trial. Colin Gunn had followed his brother David into a life of crime. Starting out early at 14 years old, he was committing burglaries, fighting and car break-ins. Colin was in a gang run by the Dawes brothers. The Dawes brothers, Robert and John, would become major criminals themselves in trafficking Class A product, money laundering and murder. After some criminal behaviour and a spell in the nick, prison had opened Colin Gunn's eyes. He realised he was doing it all wrong. The people he'd been locked up with were shifting product and had nice mansions and flash cars. The dealers, the men, the money men, the most important men he was locked up with were 8 stone soaking wet. It was time to take control, but you can't do this alone. Of course, he would have to have help from his older brother David Gunn. But to build a gang, you need trusted men. To have trusted men, they need a purpose, and paying well. It happened quickly. They would take over Bestwood. Dealers from outside the area were robbed, beaten and warned off. If your house was burgled, for a fee, they would find who'd done it and get your stuff back and beat up the burglars. With the brothers, Colin Gunn was tough, impulsive and a wild fighter, and the driving force. David Gunn was the better fighter, but he was more controlled in his thinking. He would always be thinking several steps ahead. There were many fights, many kidnappings, shootings, beatings and woundings, enough to give the devil nightmares. But it cemented their reputation, and their gang had pretty much taken over the Bestwood estate. They ran everything that was being sold in the area, a place where you never see the police. The brothers were seen as protectors by the locals, respected. An order had happened where criminals left the people in the neighbourhood alone. The brothers started getting bigger, mainly by scaring shop owners and people running pubs and clubs to get money from them. The Bestwood cartel was making a fortune in dealing, but something would happen that would change everything, and not just make the brothers famous, it would make them infamous. In August 2003, 22-year-old Marvin Bradshaw went out to the Sporting Chance pub in Bulwell to pick up his best mate Jamie Gunn. They drank regularly at several pubs. They stayed late into the night at the Sporting Chance pub, where Colin Gunn's nephew Jamie was a doorman, and that night they and a few friends and regulars stayed over and had a lock-in. Earlier that evening, Michael O'Brien had been looking for trouble. He'd been turned away from Obsessions nightclub in Nottingham because he was wearing a tracksuit. O'Brien, who thought the rules don't apply to him, got into an argument and threatened to kill the doorman there. O'Brien and his mate Gary Salmon were denied entry to the Sporting Chance pub, where they'd gone to pick someone up from the lock-in. An argument broke out, and O'Brien was hit with an ashtray, causing a cut above his eye. The two went back to Salmon's house, changed into dark clothes, gloves and balaclavas. Salmon brought out a single-barrel shotgun, wrapped in a coat. O'Brien took it, returned to the pub, and waited in the car park. That night at the Sporting Chance pub, leaving at 3:45 a.m, Marvin, who was from the Bestwood estate, was a shop fitter and was straight as a die, and wasn't involved in any crime in any way. He had been drinking on the night as he was driving his friend, the bouncer, Jamie Gunn, and 2 other mates home from the pub. The 4 men walked in the car park and got into Marvin's motor. As Marvin started the car and turned on the headlights, a gunman was standing in front of them. He fired into the car, fatally shooting Marvin. The shooting caused horror and sadness, with around 700 people attending Marvin's funeral at St Mary's Church in Bulwell. Marvin was an innocent victim, and the shot was actually meant for his best friend Jamie Gunn, who was in the car with him. Jamie Gunn was sitting in the back of the motor. The gunman had ran off, and Jamie got out of the car, cradling Marvin in his arms. His best friend. As he lay dying, he tried in vain to save him. This, as you might expect for anyone, would have a terrible effect on Jamie Gunn. He never got over it. he started drinking heavily and using. His health started to decline and he'd go missing for days. In 2004, he was told the news he was going to be a dad. Though this would bring some happiness back to his life, his physical health had deteriorated. He was constantly ill. In the meantime, the shooter, Michael O'Brien, had been arrested and charged. He said he was innocent and pleaded not guilty, despite claiming at Nottingham Crown Court that Gary Salmon had committed the murder. O'Brien was found guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison to serve a minimum term of 24 years. This would later be reduced to 18 years. After the sentencing, O'Brien hurled a glass of water at the public gallery and shouted at his victim's grieving family, "I'm not bothered. I'm a bad boy. It meant nothing to me. Your son looked like a donut with a big hole in his head. I know where you live." He carried on shouting abuse as he was removed from the court. Michael O'Brien was sent to do his sentence at the high security Whitemore prison. Gary Salmon was on the run and he'd be arrested 3 years later, and he was also sentenced to 18 years in prison for the murder. Days after O'Brien getting sent down, Jamie Gunn, 19 years old, died of pneumonia. Though that was the cause of his death, many said he would still be alive today if he never witnessed the horror that night of losing his best mate. One of the people who did not think that, but knew it 100%, was Jamie Gunn's uncle, Colin Gunn, and he was enraged, adamant he'd get his revenge on O'Brien. Colin Gunn had lost complete focus, and it was O'Brien he wanted dead. With the comments that O'Brien said to the victim's family, there was plenty who wanted him gone. Inside Whitemore prison, O'Brien was incredibly hard to reach, so Colin Gunn changed direction and would hurt the closest to O'Brien, his parents. John Sterland was married to Joan Sterland. Joan Sterland was the mother of Michael O'Brien, John Sterland being O'Brien's stepfather. John Sterland had tried to be a father to Michael O'Brien, but he was always bringing trouble to them, and on September the 14th, 2003, just a week after O'Brien was arrested for murder, the Sterland's house was shot at. The police had warned there may be reprisals and they were offered witness protection. They refused because they did not want to lose touch with their family and friends. But after the house got shot up, they moved out the following day. After staying in several places, they moved to Trusthorpe with no belongings and changed their names. They were not under any police protection. Trusthorpe is a small seaside village between Mablethorpe and Sutton-on-Sea, a beautiful place that has a 6-mile beach. It has friendly people, down-to-earth people. It's a place I personally know very well, and my favourite place to go in the UK. There's a kind of peace there you can't explain. The Sterlands also found this peace and moved there permanently. But little did they know, of all the places to move to, they chose Trusthorpe, but just 12 miles away, David Gunn owned a caravan further down the coast. It could have been a chance meeting on the Golden Sands beach, their return to Nottingham for a family wedding, or a serious outburst by Joan Sterland at a bingo hall in Trusthorpe. Where John was quiet, Joan could easily aggravate a situation. Their former neighbours said she loved her kids and would do anything for them. She was a strong woman, prone to confrontation. Any of these could have led professional hitmen bent on revenge to their door. The Gunn's connections ran far and wide. They knew everyone, and they found out where the Sterlands were living from 2 former British Telecom workers the Gunns had on their payroll. At David Gunn's caravan, the plan to kill them was made, and on August the 8th, 2004, on a Sunday evening, Mr. Sterland, 55 years old, and his 51-year-old wife were shot dead by 2 men with Beretta pistols, wearing dark clothing, who entered their bungalow. The murders shocked the sleepy seaside town, which they had never seen any crime like this. In fact, the main crime is double yellow parking in the holiday season, or someone setting off their alarms, banging the 2p waterfalls in the arcades. As you can imagine, it got a lot of national news attention. Police had in their sight their prime suspect, Colin Gunn and David Gunn. Police initiated Operation Starburst to take out Nottingham gangs, dismantling them from the ground up, the main one being the Bestwood cartel. The tit-for-tat fighting on Nottingham streets that would see it renamed in the press and the news as Shottingham. Brutal punishment shootings between rival gangs. There'd be the high-profile senseless murders of 14-year-old schoolgirl Daniel Becken, and she was shot walking home from a fair, and jeweller Marion Bates, 64 years old, who was gunned down when her shop was robbed. The person who committed the robbery and gunned her down, Peter Williams, was sentenced to 22 years in prison in 2005 after being found guilty of a murder. James Brodie, who was Peter Williams' accomplice, vanished the day of the murder. It is now believed Brodie killed her, but it's not thought he got away. It's thought he was kidnapped and murdered. The jewellery store raid was thought to have been masterminded by Colin Gunn. Skeletal remains were found on a local farm, thought to be Brodie. Police ruled out the possibility that remains belonged to Brodie after checking dental records. To this day, the remains have never been identified, and Brodie is still missing. By now, the locals were sick of it, and the violence was getting too extreme. When you start making the papers every day, there's only so long the powers in charge will let you operate. After the Sterlings murder, it would be uncovered that the Gunns had police in their pockets. The dirty copper had access to CID information, and for years had been feeding the Bestwood cartel information. The officer's name was PC Charles Fletcher and was a childhood friend of Colin Gunn, and for 24 grand cash a year, he gave out police info on the murders of John and Joan Sterling, Marion Bates' murder in Arnold, a near-fatal assault, beatings, surveillance, and if the police were getting any tips off Grasses. After his arrest, PC Charles Fletcher wrote a letter to his work friends at Radford Road. He said, "I do not expect any forgiveness for my actions, and I do not ask for it. I can only offer my deepest apologies in betraying your trust and confidence in me. It's something I'm immeasurably ashamed of, and it's something I shall live with for the rest of my life. I feel my greed, vanity and naivety were to blame, and the fact I didn't have the strength or courage to face up to my wrongdoing and tell someone before the inevitable happened. I was blind to the consequences of my actions, and I chose to ignore them." Colin Gunn and David Gunn were arrested on conspiracy to commit murder. Amazingly, the suspected gunmen John Russell and Michael McNee were not arrested for murder but conspiracy. No one has ever been charged for the actual murder of the Sterlings. In June 2006, Colin Gunn was given a 35-year minimum sentence for planning to murder the Sterlings. John Russell was sentenced to at least 30 years. Michael McNee was sentenced to a minimum of 25 years. David Gunn was found not guilty of conspiracy to murder. PC Charles Fletcher was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Amazingly, Operation Starburst managed to locate another dirty copper. PC Phil Parr was sentenced to 7 years for police misconduct. Operation Starburst had nailed Colin Gunn and the corrupt police officers, but it was not over. Colin Gunn got sentenced to 9 years for the bribery charges. Colin Gunn's time in prison had not been a quiet one. He'd regularly been in trouble behind bars and was even on the internet to communicate with members of his Bestwood gang. While on remand at Belmarsh, he and a fellow inmate attacked 9 Muslims remanded on terrorist charges after he felt they disrespected Christmas. Colin Gunn became friendly with notorious M25 murderer Kenneth Noy at Whitemore Prison, and even got him to send his relatives greeting cards. While inside, Colin Gunn became friends with Miami fugitive and UK police killer David Bieber, where David Bieber was serving a whole life tariff. Bieber was looking to escape, and the American cellmate was a very connected South African. A group led by Bieber and the South African had hatched a plan which involved a riot, a helicopter and firearms, but it was discovered by prison bosses, and Gunn was moved to HMP Long Lartin in Evesham, Worcestershire. A crime family that was brought down out of revenge, but the police are getting funding more to bring down the gangs. Criminals roughing up criminals is not newsworthy. Nobody cares. But when it's poor innocent sods who are just going about in their day-to-day life, then your card is getting marked. The criminals who do this don't last long. Colin Gunn, who was so successful in building a criminal empire, with his brother risked it all for bloody revenge. If the Sterlings were not murdered, would Colin Gunn still be free? The police corruption investigation was brought on by the Sterling murders. So, had Colin Gunn pushed it too far? Colin Gunn's 35-year sentence has ended his reign, and when he was sentenced, there was riots in the streets. There's still major arrests of the gang now. 10 members were arrested in 2024, and we'll cover this in a future video. David Gunn was released from a 3-year sentence after spending half his life behind bars over different years, and he's now done with it. Michael O'Brien, Colin Gunn's nemesis, will soon be free. His 18-year sentence is nearly at an end, and as provocative as ever, he is now admitted to the murder of Martin Bradshaw. He's now a dad and a granddad, and said he was not aiming for Jamie Gunn that night. He had just been beaten up by 5 men and was not thinking straight. That may be so, but firing that gun, unknowingly that night, he killed his parents. It was not even for any financial gain, but for reputation. Colin Gunn managed to post a letter on Facebook from a smuggled mobile phone and wrote, "I'll be home one day, and I can't wait to see the look in certain people's eyes, and see the fear of me being there."